Okay, so very briefly, ladies and gentlemen, my recent trip to Mezibush. Mezibush is the place of the Ba'al Shem Tov, the place where he is interred. Although we do not say about tzaddikim, great saintly souls, that they were buried, because the Talmud expresses it this way. The Talmud says that tzaddikim, great saintly people, even in their deaths are alive. In other words, they're more alive, probably, even when they pass away, than we are. Now, what does it mean that they're alive? Obviously, it means that the body down below might not be, but might not be present, so to speak. But certainly the soul is alive, and the soul of the tzaddik is fully aware of what's going on with all of his disciples and disciples of disciples and so on and so forth. And we know this is for a fact because the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch gave over, how shall I say, he gave over an experience that he had, a prolonged experience that he had in the section called Parashat Ki Tavo, which we were reading last week, which is the part which is very often the section that comes out on the birthday of the Ba'al Shem Tov, which is what I went for. And his soul ascended, the Rebbe Rashab, that's the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, he's Rabbi Shalom Dovber. His soul ascended to the Heichal Ba'al Shem Tov, to the chamber, so to speak, of the Ba'al Shem Tov in the Garden of Eden, in very, very lofty, very lofty chamber, where you heard various teachings delivered by the Ba'al Shem Tov there. And there were many, many souls that were in attendance, so to speak, or listening to the class, listening to the shiur, listening to the teachings. Very, very interesting, incident that he related. Altogether, there were 7 different teachings that he expressed, and there's a booklet, a very interesting booklet that describes them and explains them, and so on and so forth, and what the messages were. So it's suffice to say that the tzaddik is alive, even though not in this world, but alive in the upper worlds. And if the truth be told, the greater the tzaddik, the more he's alive in this world as well, in the sense that the soul of that tzaddik is fully aware of what's going on down here, down below. Okay, so in any event, I went to the Ba'al Shem Tov, and my purpose in going there was manifold. There were several reasons that I wanted to go. One of the ostensible reason is I wanted to pray for 2 particular people, one of whom is very ill, and one of whom needs to get married, a lady or a woman that needs to get married. But those were only 2 of the ostensible reasons. The main reason for going is actually to V'tehi nafsho kshura b'nefesh adoni. Let my soul be, the prophet says, one of the prophets say, let my soul be bound to the soul of my master. Elisha said to Elijah, to Eliyahu. And that was the point. The point was to bind soul to soul as much as possible, to attempt to reach a deeper understanding spiritually and intellectually of what it is that the Ba'al Shem Tov actually teaches. And that is what the experience was all about, and that's why I was there. And I'm hoping that, in fact, that was accomplished, as well as all the other things I hope were accomplished. As you probably know, I mentioned to you that I would take your prayers there, whoever sent them, and in fact, I did. And may you all experience the solution to your prayers, the resolution or the answer, whatever it is, and may it be in a speedy and easy manner. In any event, one of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov, one of the fundamental teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov that I would like to address tonight is why a particular person would need to be married. She wants to get married. She wants to get married. She's not married. She's already over 30 and she's not married and she wants to get married. So I'm declining that. Okay. Sorry, there was a phone call that came through. She wants to get married but hasn't met the right guy yet. So, all right. Yes, so in any event, there is a verse, an extremely important verse, a verse that occurs actually in this week's Torah reading. As you probably know, this particular class usually focuses on one verse or more than one verse in the Torah reading of the week, and we try and derive some kind of lesson and understanding, a deeper understanding of what it's all about. And that is what we're going to do right now. We are going to look at the following verse. The following verse is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verse 11, 12, 13, 14. Deuteronomy 30, 11 to 14. I don't have the English translation here, but I'll translate it for you. And it says as follows. I'm just going to read the verse and then I'll translate it. Ki ha-mitzvah hazot, this commandment. Which commandment is he talking about? The commandment of what's called Teshuvah, returning to God, or what is usually translated as repentance, incorrectly translated as repentance. But in any event, Ki ha-mitzvah hazot, this mitzvah, this commandment, asher anochi b'tzavcha hayom, which I am commanding you this day. And I'm commanding you this day doesn't mean in the past. It means this day and every day. The commandment that I'm commanding you this day is, what I didn't do was record. Oh, I did. Yeah. That I'm commanding you this day, and therefore every day from that time on. The point is, lo nifleti mimcha, it is not far from you. It is not very distant from you. And it's not even at a short distance from you. It's not in the heavens, so that you have to say, who's going to go up to the heavens to get it back, to get it for us, and explain it to us, and we will do it. It's not in the heavens that has to happen. It's not on the other side of the sea. Who's going to cross the sea for us and bring it back for us. And we will hear it and we will do it. No, it's not over the sea. It's not in the heavens. It's not far from you. It's very, very close to you, as we will find out right now. This thing is very, very close to you. In your mouth, in your heart, to do it. This thing is very, very close to you, in your mind and in your heart, in your mouth and in your heart, in your mouth, your heart, to do it. Okay, it's very close to you. That is the verse on which the following teaching, that's a verse. So the following teaching of the Ba'al Shem Tov says as follows. He says like this: it's not far from you, it's not distant from you, meaning to say that this is the teaching of the Ba'al Shem Tov again. I'm just reading it from its original source. The mitzvah of Teshuvah, of what is usually called repentance, incorrectly, but what we will call returning, and its intentions, and the yichudim. The yichudim means the unifications that are done usually through meditation, and particularly meditation on divine names in the Kabbalistic tradition, or meditation on divine concepts in the Hasidic tradition. And he says it's not far from you, it's not distant from you. Why? Because it is you. It's part of you. This is who you are. This is what you are. And that's why it says it's not over, it's not in the heavens, it's not on the other side of the earth, the other side of the ocean, that you have to go get it, and so on and so forth. It is essentially you. It is you. Now, let me explain what that means. The whole concept of Teshuvah, which is usually, again, called repentance. Again, I made the blessing before, just anyone is curious. I made the blessing already before the class started. So, the usual concept of contrition, I guess that's the word that's usually used. Contrition, which is a translation of the word Teshuvah, usually has something to do with repenting for things that we've done in the past and so on and so forth. And there's definitely place for that. I'm not saying there's not. There is definitely a necessity, in fact. It's a mitzvah, it's a commandment, it's a requirement to be aware, be cognizant of what it is that we did wrong, and to admit that we did wrong, and to do our best to rectify what we did wrong. But that is not the concept of Teshuvah. That's not the essential concept of Teshuvah. It is a concept of Teshuvah, but it is not the essential concept of Teshuvah. The essential concept of Teshuvah is that the soul is part of God above and never became separated. And the whole process of Teshuvah, of, if you want to call it repentance, is to rediscover that connection. Not make that connection, but simply rediscover that connection. In other words, to restore the connection to the way it was originally. The soul is called part of God above. The soul comes down through a whole process of descent into the physical world. There are various levels of soul, as we have discussed many, many times. There are 5 levels of soul. The lowest level of the soul, the level which is associated with the physical body, which is called nefesh, the lowest level of the soul, the awareness or the consciousness of the physical body, the life force and consciousness of the physical body. That aspect is, it is possible that that aspect of the body can be involved somehow or another in the idea of sin, in doing something against the divine will. Also, the next level up, the level of ruach, the level of ruach could also be subject to this idea of going against the divine will, in the sense that the way one experiences emotions such as anger, such as lust, and similar kinds of things, or any of the emotional states. Despair is another one. Any of those emotional states are ultimately a negative state of being, and therefore need to be recognized and rectified, and so on. So that level of soul also, in ruach, could also come to the concept of sin. Again, sin in Jewish tradition means that you're off track. It doesn't mean sin, I think, in the tradition of the world, the worldly tradition. Sin is much more associated with devils and horns and pitchforks and and burning fires and all that kind of thing. Whatever. Let's not get into it. But as far as the word for sin in Hebrew is aveira. Aveira. The word aveira means to, it could be translated loosely as off the tracks. La'avor is to pass off the main path, the beaten path, the correct path for you. The correct path is not the same path for everybody. Everybody has their track, their channel. Yes, of course, that channel has to align with the channel of Torah and the channel of the mitzvot, the commandments. There has to be an alignment. But that alignment is not necessarily the same for everybody. And I'll give you an example. People who belong to the tribe of the Levites, and particularly the family of Kohanim, the priests, the priestly clan or the priestly sect within, there were 12 tribes, and there was one tribe, the tribe of Levi, the Levites, and one family within the Levite family called the Kohanim. They are the priestly clan. So for them, there are a lot more requirements to remain pure and untainted than for the average individual. So their path is a much more stringent one in general than the average individual. Similarly, someone on a higher spiritual plane, much more is required of them than is required of a person who's a simple, let's call it, manual laborer, let's say. From someone, there's the basic requirement of everybody, and then there's beyond the letter of the law, which the higher up on the I wouldn't say hierarchy, that's not the right way to put it, but the higher up you are in your spiritual development, the more is required. Just as less is required of a young child, more is required of a young adult, and a mature adult, much more is required. More responsibility, more more thoughtfulness, and so on and so forth is required from an older person. Now, of course, you sometimes get very mature youngsters, and you get some very immature oldsters, as we all know. But nevertheless, in spiritual development, it works that way too. There are souls who have gone further and gotten further, and more is required of them in terms of their responsibilities, in terms of their the care with which they do things, and so on and so forth. Okay. So we discussed so far the first and the second levels of the soul, nefesh and ruach, and the same thing is true of neshama, the level called neshama. Neshama really means the essential life force of a person, but it's manifested primarily in one's intellectual faculties, Now, in this too, one can have misunderstandings, not misunderstandings based on incorrect understanding of the fact, but misunderstandings based on incorrect premises in the first place. In other words, one's mindset could be in the wrong place. An incorrect mindset leads to incorrect emotion, incorrect behavior, incorrect life in general, and needs to be rectified. It could lead to a life lacking in truth. I wouldn't say totally. I don't think everybody's totally, there's anybody who's totally lacking in truth, but certainly needing some rectification in that department. That all comes from the level called neshama, which is more the intellectual faculties, the chokhmah bina da'at of a person that are involved with the concept of truth, of right and wrong, and truth and falsehood, and so on. But the two higher levels of soul are not relevant, are not able to be tainted. Certainly the highest level of soul, the second highest level of soul, is somewhat of a discussion about this, whether it is able to be tainted or not. And I think the conclusion is that it can be temporarily distracted, or I suppose distracted would be, or facing the wrong direction. Could be temporarily not noticing that it's needs to change course. That could happen, but certainly the essence of the soul, called the yechida, the highest level of soul, that is always yechida l'yachtach, that is always one, and one in such a sense that it's not possible for the soul to be separated from God at all. Why not? Because it's part of God above. That's what it is. It's part of God above. So what the Ba'al Shem Tov said in his teaching is that it's not far from you. It is indeed very close to you, because that's who you are. That's essentially who you are. So the whole concept of Teshuvah, therefore, the whole concept, the fair of the paper, the foul of the blot. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. The whole concept of Teshuvah, therefore, is to restore that original connection the way it is, that should be manifested throughout all levels of the soul. In other words, that feeling of connection should be there. Does a person always feel connected? There are those that always feel connected. The Ba'al Shem Tov was certainly one of those who was always connected. Not only did he feel connected, but he was, right? There was one time when he told the story subsequently of, he came to a certain, let's call it a passage in time where he didn't know where he was. He got lost. He got lost in a spiritual sense. He got lost. Now, it didn't do anything negative. He just couldn't find the way out of where he was. The Ba'al Shem Tov was someone who was involved not only in rectifying and elevating his own soul, but in rectifying and elevating the souls of others. Now, in order to rectify and elevate the soul of somebody else, so the Ba'al Shem Tov had to clothe himself within that person, so to speak, to clothe himself within that person. In other words, to clothe his consciousness, his soul, within that person's soul, and then guide them to their proper destination. So it happened once that he couldn't find his way out. He couldn't find his way back, so to speak. But the whole purpose of it was that there was a lost soul that he sort of met on the way, and that lost soul he eventually managed to bring back. He managed to bring it back. That was a lost soul who had deliberately distanced himself from, he was brought up as a religious person and so on, but had deliberately abandoned it and did whatever he could to distance himself. Now, let me tell you a similar story of the Ba'al Shem Tov that will sort of illustrate this idea to some extent. There was one of the great disciples of the Ba'al Shem Tov was somebody whose name was Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Jacob, Rabbi Yaakov. This Rabbi Yaakov, before the Ba'al Shem Tov passed away, the Ba'al Shem Tov told him that what he should do is he should go around telling stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And he would know that he didn't have to do this anymore. At a certain point in time, something would happen that would tell him, that would inform him that his duty was finished. That, in other words, he'd done what he had accomplished what he needed to accomplish, and therefore he wouldn't have to tell any more stories. So this Rabbi Yaakov went around from village to village, from town to town, and you can imagine life wasn't easy, from moving around and traveling around all the time, and he sort of eked out a living somehow or another. Keep body and soul together. It wasn't easy for him, but this is what his teacher wanted him to do. So this is what he did, and he did it with enthusiasm, and he did it properly. And he had a storehouse, because he'd been with Ba'al Shem Tov for a very long time. He had a treasure house of stories that he would relate, and people were very grateful. But unfortunately, the kind of people that came to listen to the Ba'al Shem Tov stories very often were not people who were able to help very much financially. In any event, he went again from town to town, from place to place, and he once heard about a certain man who lived in a far-off place. If I'm not mistaken, the place was Romania. we're talking about from the Ukraine to Romania is quite a journey if you're traveling by horse and wagon. But anyway, he made his way over to Romania. He heard over there in Romania that there was a very, very wealthy Jewish man who would give a handsome sum for stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov. So he went to this man's, eventually he arrived at this man's, he found out where he lived and so on and so forth. He went to this man's house and he said to him, my name is Yaakov. I was a disciple of the Ba'al Shem Tov for many years. I have many, many stories to tell. And I hear that you are always waiting to hear stories of the Ba'al Shem Tov. He said, yes, indeed. And it was already Thursday evening. He says, tomorrow evening at the Sabbath meal, Friday evening meal, I'm going to invite a lot of people and tell us whatever stories you can manage. So this Rabbi Yaakov went and he rested up a little bit after his long journey, and came the Friday night meal. They did whatever, what is the normal traditional. They made kiddush and a moitzi and so on and so forth. They, sacrament on wine and then on bread and so on and so forth. And everybody was enjoying the meal. Came the time when everybody had their fill, and the host turns to Rabbi Yaakov and he tells him, so tell some stories. All of a sudden, Rabbi Yaakov's mind went completely blank. And he was very embarrassed and very, very upsetting for him, because he knew hundreds of stories and he repeated them many, many times, but his mind went blank. The host gave him a look of pity and said to him, don't worry about it. Tomorrow morning, after the morning prayers, when we have the morning meal, the late morning meal, there you'll tell us a story. So it happened again, late morning meal, came the time for him to tell a story. He couldn't remember anything. His mind was blank. And the same thing happened at the at Shalosh Seudos, the third meal of the Sabbath. And then the host said to him, surely Moitza Shabbos, after Shabbat, which is the time after the Sabbath, which is the time that is traditionally when we tell stories of saintly people, of tzaddikim, that is the time surely that you will remember a story. So he said, no, that's Rabbi Yaakov. He said, I'm so embarrassed. I must seem like a charlatan to you, a fraud. I do know stories of Ba'al Shem Tov, but for some reason my mind has gone completely blank. I can't remember anything. I can't embarrass myself again. And the host begged him to please. He said, don't worry about it. Even if you can't remember, it's okay, whatever. Anyway, so came the time for the Malava Malka, the meal that accompanies the queen. Sabbath is called the queen, that accompanies the queen out into the week. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Yaakov remembered a story. He got so excited that he said, I must tell the story right now. And he told the following. This is the story that he told. He said, I was once traveling with Ba'al Shem Tov, and we came to a town, and we came to the Jewish area of the town. In those days, the Jewish area of the town was a separate area, usually a ghetto of some sort very often. And he said, we came to this town and all the windows and doors were boarded up, and the place looked like it was abandoned. We asked around what's going on, and we knocked on a few doors, no answer. Eventually, somebody showed us where one of the Gaboim, the Gabai means the person who takes care of the synagogue, where one of the Gabayim lived. And we pounded and pounded and pounded on the door until someone peeped out from behind some iron bars that were barring the windows. And he said, go away, go away, go away. There's about to be a pogrom. Pogrom was a massacre. And get out of here, you're not safe. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said, no, we're here to stay and we want to come in. So very reluctantly, they let him in, opened this very heavy, thick door, and they let him in and quickly barred the door again. And the Ba'al Shem Tov says, what's the story? What happened here? So he said, the Gabbai said told the following story. He said that there's a priest who is an excellent orator, a fiery orator. He's an excellent speaker, and he gets the crowd worked up. But usually, when he gets the crowd worked up, unfortunately, the results are not happy. The results are usually they end in a pogrom. They end in some kind of, the men get all excited and they come and they burn down Jewish stores. Someone like the BLM riots and so on and so forth. They burn down people's property. They burn down stores, and they riot. And we're usually we're always on the receiving end of it. And this is about to happen. It's planned that he's going to be giving a speech today, and it's a very, very dangerous time. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said, what time is he supposed to be giving the speech? So it was sometime in the afternoon, 3:00 in the afternoon or whatever it was. So after he started giving his speech, they couldn't hear the speech from where they were, but after the appointed time came, the Ba'al Shem Tov said to me, says Rabbi Yaakov, go out and go to this man, to this priest, and tell him that I need to see him. He should come to me, I need to see him. So Rabbi Yaakov was a little concerned, but if the Ba'al Shem Tov told him to do it, he was going to do it. And the people inside the house were absolutely petrified. They said, you're crazy, you're taking your life in your hands, they'll murder you, you'll never come out of there alive, and so on and so forth. Anyway, he went out unarmed, made his way through the crowd, and there was a very big crowd. And he somehow got up on the podium, and he whispered in this priest's ear that the Ba'al Shem Tov wants to see him. The man looked startled, and he said, not now, I'll come later. And so Rabbi Yaakov went back and reported to the Ba'al Shem Tov what the person had said. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said, go out again and tell him, no, I have to speak to him now. Anyway, this happened a couple more times until the priest excused himself and he came to talk to the Ba'al Shem Tov, and he spent a couple of hours talking to the Ba'al Shem Tov in private. What transpired in that conversation, I don't know, said Rabbi Yaakov to this wealthy man and to all his guests. I don't know what transpired during that time, but the man left, and I could see from his face that he was an altered person. He was an altered person. And that's the story that I remember. So the host thanked him profusely, and he said, let me tell you the other half of the story. He said, I was unfortunately orphaned at a very young age. And because I was an orphan, no parents, no one to bring me up properly, the community did try to take care of me. There was an orphanage, they tried to take care of me, but conditions were not the greatest. And I became a very wild child, a wild youth, and somewhat like those people that Wendy has to deal with all the time, Wendy and Ernest have to deal with, wayward youth. I became a wayward youth. And the community who was trying to provide for me in order to try and control me, so they would punish me. And sometimes I was so wild that sometimes they beat me. That's what people did in those days. This is before the days of a modern disciplinary method, which is giving people lollipops. But in any event, excuse me, in any event, I was a wild youth, and because I resented the fact that they punished me, and sometimes they punished me by withholding food, one of my meals, and so on. So I got very angry with the Jewish community and decided I was going to abandon Judaism altogether and convert to Christianity, and that's what I did, and I became a priest, but I was born as a Jewish child. Now, after I spoke to the Ba'al Shem Tov, after he spoke to me, and he explained to me a number of different things, and he showed me a way to rectify my past and to restore my soul, so to speak. And I decided I had a very strong desire to actually do that, because no one had ever approached me in this way before, with such love and with such wisdom and with such compassion. And I decided I would give it a shot. And in fact, I did. I left where I was, and I left the priesthood, and I buried myself basically in the texts and in Jewish law and Jewish thought and so on and so forth, until I became fairly proficient. I married and set up a family and so on and so forth, and here I am today, a wealthy man, being blessed and so on. How did I know that my repentance was received? The Ba'al Shem Tov told me that when I hear the story about myself, then I will know that everything has been, everything is in order. Things have been rectified and restored to the way they were and the way that they should be. And so when you first came in, I recognized you immediately. Of course, you didn't recognize me, but I recognized you immediately. And I knew that this might be an opportunity to hear the story about myself. When you didn't remember the first night, I knew exactly why. When you didn't remember the second time during the day, I knew exactly why. And I prayed intensely that my soul would be restored and returned to its former pristine state. And eventually my prayers were accepted. And that is why you were able to remember the story and tell me the story. Of course, he rewarded him very, very handsomely, and Rabbi Yaakov went on his way. That's the story. Now, here we have a situation where a person was, not only was he contravening, sinning, if you want to call it, every possible commandment in the Torah, it even converted out of Judaism, which is the cardinal sin. But he had caused the deaths of others, the destruction of property of others by pogroms that he incited, and so on and so forth. And nevertheless, he was accepted. Why? Because the truth is that the soul is never, the essence of the soul is never separated. It's not, that's what the Ba'al Shem Tov said. He quoted the verse, it's not far from you, it's very close to you. And then the Ba'al Shem Tov explained, what does it mean that it's very close to you? It is you. That's who you are. You're that part of God above. And therefore, Teshuvah, returning, restoring your soul, may require some work, but it's certainly not impossible. It's certainly not impossible. This is something that can be done. Why? Because this is who you are. All that needs to be done is you need to reveal the who you are in your essence. And yes, it may require us to strip off many layers, and sometimes many layers, in order to get to the essential core. And that can be a tremendous amount of very hard work to get there, but it can be done. And it's not far from you. It's not impossible to do. It's very close. Okay, that's the first part of tonight's class. I would like to also tell you some of my understanding what might be coming our way in this coming year. Okay, so as I've done before. This coming year is the year 5782 in the Hebrew calendar. Unfortunately, those people who are on Facebook, let me see if I can switch this camera around so that you can see what I'm talking about. I don't know if you can see it, but that's the best I can do right now. I don't know. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, I'm not sure. But in any event, that's the something in the chat. 1 second, let me just see who's saying what. Yeah. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, so the verse over here is actually a verse. So again, the year is the year 5782, which in Hebrew letters is Tav Shin Pei Beit, right? That's actually Tav Shin Pei Beit is actually just the 782, right? It's preceded by the Hey in front of it, which is the year 5000. But usually when we talk about the year, we don't talk about the thousands, we just talk about the hundreds. So it's the year 782, which is Tav Shin. Tav is 400, Shin is 300, Pei is 80, and Bet is 2. Now, where do we find Tav Shin Pei Bet in a verse? There's only one verse where you find those letters, and they are the following. The order of the letters is not important, but this is the verse. You can see highlighted here in red. Yeah, what's highlighted in red in this part of the verse is the Taf, the Shin, the Pei, and the Bet, right? Taf, Shin, Pei, Bet. So what does this verse say? It's a verse in Vayikra, Chav Gimel, Chav Bet, which is, Vayikra is Leviticus 23:22. Leviticus 23:22. It's talking about some of the commandments that are dependent. It's called mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz. Those mitzvot, those commandments that depend on the land of Israel. When we have the land of Israel, these things are required. These mitzvot are required. One of the mitzvot, obviously, is to share part of your crops with the priest and with the Levite and with poor people and so on and so forth. But this particular verse talks about another mitzvah, another commandment, which is the following. It says like this: when you cut down, when you reap the produce of your fields. Now, when we say fields, we mean fields and not orchards. In other words, we're talking here primarily about grains, right? So when you reap your grains, your produce, your grains of your land, artzachem, lo do not destroy the corners, do not gather the corners of the field. In other words, the corners of your field, leave for the poor, as we'll see in a second. You leave those over. So those letters, to destroy the corners of your field in your reaping, that's what spells the year Tafshin Pei Bet. And then it continues and it says, and the leket, the gathering of, in other words, when the harvesters were gathering the wheat, so they would cut it down with sickles. In those days, obviously, they didn't even combine harvesters and things like that. They didn't have such things. Cut down with a sickle, and sometimes some of the stalks would remain behind. Either they would remain standing or they would fall down to the ground. You're not allowed to take those either, right? Once they fall into the ground or once they remain behind from the bundle, you have to leave those there. Leave those there for who? We'll see shortly. Again, and the leket, the gleanings, you are not allowed to take. Don't gather the gleanings. Who are they for? For the poor person and for the convert who doesn't have any land of his own, he converted. Tazovotam, leave them. Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God. So you have to leave this behind. This is a command directly from me. God says, do not gather all the way to the corners of your field, and anything that falls to the ground or is left standing after your harvesting must be left for the poor and for those who convert to Judaism, who might need a hand. Now, many Gerim were actually very wealthy people, but many converts were actually very wealthy. Shema and Avtalion, for example, and others. Let's not get into it now. But what is this all about? What is the whole concept of Peah, of leaving the corners of the field, all about? So the Midrash, there's several Midrashim. Midrash is rabbinic literature that it usually explains the homiletical meaning. In other words, the the self-improvement aspect of things, right? So the Midrash then goes on to explain why we are obligated to leave these things behind. And it says like this. All right, I think you don't probably need the verses anymore. Let me just stop the share over here. And the Midrash says like this. He says, he says there are certain people in the world who, whenever they do something, they want it done all the way to the end. They want it done all the way to the end. They don't want to share it with anybody else. It's all mine, right? All of it. No matter how wealthy the person may be, he nevertheless feels that since it's mine, I have the privilege and I have the right and I have the how shall I say it? I guess the privilege, yeah. It belongs to me and therefore I can do with it what I want. Along comes the Torah and says, no, that's not true. If you don't share what you have, if you destroy the corners of your field, destroy meaning you take it for yourself, you are in fact destroying yourself. You too will be destroyed in the same way, right? In other words, a person who is so completely self-involved that he can't see the needs of anybody else or the needs of people around him, poor people, he's so self-involved that eventually his self-involvement is going to be that person's downfall. There's a story like this. What was his name again? The person who touched whatever he touched turned to gold. And eventually, what was his name again? Mythological, whatever. In Greek mythology, it was a king who everything he touched turned to gold. And eventually, Midas, that's it, exactly. Thank you, Wendy. Midas. He was so stingy and so unwilling to share anything and so self-involved that eventually even his food turned to gold and he couldn't eat and he starved to death. That is Midas. Yeah, there you go. So the Midrash, that's what the Midrash says. Okay. There's another Midrash called the Sifra that asks the following question. It says as follows. Why does this particular passage about the corners of your field and leaving the corners of your field for the poor and for the convert, etc., why does it appear in the middle of a section that's actually talking about the festivals? Why does it appear here? It speaks about Passover and the holiday of Shavuot when we receive the Torah on the one hand, and it also talks about Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, the upcoming New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, also coming up, and Sukkot, On the other hand, and this paragraph appears in the middle of these descriptions of what's required to be done during the festivals, and what is it doing over here? Why does it belong here? Why is this its place? That's what the Sifra asks. And it says, the answer is to teach you that someone who gives charity, in other words, he allows leket, chicha, and peya. These are the three of the mitzvot. Leket, again, the stalks which he doesn't gather and he leaves behind for the poor. Shikha, a sheaf which he forgot, which is not mentioned here. And peya, the corners of the field, if he leaves them in the proper manner to the poor, it's as if he had built the temple in his time and offered the offerings, the various offerings in the temple within it. In other words, since the verses around are all talking about what is done during temple times in the temple, therefore this paragraph occurs right in the middle of them to tell you that if you do what this paragraph requires, and you leave the corners of your field for the poor, it is as if you are bringing offerings in the temple itself. Okay. All right. Now, the Maharal was a very great sage who lived in the 1500s in Prague, the Maharal of Prague. He is famed for having created a golem. A golem is, I think they translate it as a humanoid. Yeah, I'm going to get there, Terry. I'm going to get to the bottom line shortly. So the Maharal was famous for creating a humanoid. Now, just 1 second. Let me just say hello to some people that joined us. Bring them on camera. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do over here. And okay, yeah. All right. I don't know. Never done this before, really, so I'm not sure what to do. Okay, in any event, the Maharal of Prague, the famous Maharal of Prague, says as follows. Why is this verse always read before the Jewish New Year? And he says to you, this is in order to tell you that on the day of judgment, when one could be looking at a rough year ahead, to say the least. I mean, we don't even know what a rough year is. We've had a rough year with COVID and so on and so forth. But think of the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, and things like that. I mean, half of society died during these times. And then there were pogroms and there were wars, and the wars then were brutal, and there were and there was starvation, and there were, don't ask. You probably know as well as I do. Anyway, so the Maharal of Prague says that this is read before. It's read around the time of Rosh Hashanah. I mean, it's associated with the Jewish New Year. So to make you aware that the way to ensure yourself a good year is by sharing your benefits. You're sharing your blessings, with other people. There is a similar statement from the Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, who's called the Shalah, wrote a book called the Shnei Luchot HaBrit. He says a similar kind of a thing. Then there is the Mavor Sha'arim. Mavor Sha'arim is teachings of the Arizal. The Arizal says like this. The whole concept of Peah has to do with Malchut. Malchut, the final of the 10 Sfirot. We know that the 10 Sfirot, Keter, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Malchut is called Peah. It's called the corner of the field, so to speak. It's the place where the field is a place where the fruits of your labor are evident. The fruits of what it is that you've been doing right throughout the year, not only in terms of the work that you do, not only in terms of your planting, but in terms of your spiritual planting as well. The seeds that you have planted have finally started to ripen, and they produced a crop, and some of that crop has to be shared, at least 1/10 of it. Malchut is 1/10 of the 10 Sfirot, has to be shared with others. That's the way he explains it. And he says that what does this do? He says ultimately this opens up the channels of blessing, so that the blessing will flow through all the way through to Malchut, and Malchut will channel that blessing down. Malchut of the world of Atzilut will channel that blessing down into the lower worlds, into the worlds in which we live. Okay. All right. So the idea, therefore, is that this is the time when we have to arouse compassion in ourselves for those who are less fortunate than ourselves. It's a time for compassion. It's a time for thinking about other people. Those other people could be family. It could be neighbors. It could be friends. It could be people that you don't even know. But to have a thought about those outside of ourselves. Now, how does this connect with that which we started off originally, the whole concept of Teshuvah? Just as the Hasidic text in particular explain, that just as the Almighty takes care of us on a moment-to-moment basis, which is called in the literature, it's called Hashgacha Pratit, individual divine providence. That individual divine providence that looks after us and cares for us, takes care of us. That divine providence that takes care of us and by which we have lived until now, by which we have hopefully prospered until now. Just as that divine providence takes care of us, we have to similarly help to take care of others. Not only does that ensure that the divine providence is going to be an abundant divine providence, but it'll be an abundant divine providence for everybody. In other words, we have to see ourselves as a distribution point, not as only a gathering in point, which is a valid thing. We can gather in, but we also have to be a distribution point. There is a saying that the more you distribute, the more you give out, the more you're able to take in. The less a person gives out, the less they're able to absorb, because they don't know what it means to absorb. If you have in mind when you're absorbing that you're going to need to distribute it across a wide band of your network, in other words, amongst many different people. Now, I'm not talking simply about necessarily giving charity. That is also definitely part of it. There's no question about it. Giving charity and helping others, and so on and so forth. But it could also be just a kindly word, a smile, a word of encouragement, a word of comfort to someone who you know needs it. In other words, sharing the light a little bit is not only sharing the dollars, but sharing the light is what we are talking about over here. And that's the whole concept of Teshuvah, because when everybody works on things together, the sum of the whole is much greater than the ability of the individuals to achieve. In other words, how shall I say it? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I think that's the way to put it. Okay, so therefore this year, the entire year, not just now, before the Jewish New Year, but the entire year is a year when we have to look outwards, when we have to look out for other people, when we don't destroy the corners of the field, but allow some aspect of ourselves to be shared by some aspect of our good fortune to be shared by others. And spread the goodness around, we'll find that the world is a better place. It doesn't require a lot for things to start to improve. And God knows we all need it. Okay, that is what I have to say tonight. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. I think we've been going for an hour already, more than an hour. So I'll be happy to take questions if there are any. If not, then I have a good, sweet, beautiful, meaningful year, and in spiritual matters and in material matters as well. Oh, Karen, how are you? Nice to see you back. Okay. There don't seem to be any questions. Good luck all year long. Thank you. Happy New Year to all. Yeah, thank you, Wendy, and to you too. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Happy New Year, everybody. And may you all be signed and sealed and inscribed for a sweet, wonderful, joyous, shared, light-filled year. All right. Thank you. All right, I will post this on our YouTube channel, Kabbalah Decoded, shortly, as soon as it's downloaded. All right. Night, everybody. Obviously, there will be classes next week, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday night, probably not, because it's after fast. And we'll go the following week, probably. All right. Night.
Tov.